Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm super.
She is super, and I am natural today.
And I will be the Dr. Junkie.
You are definitely a junkie.
You're gonna have to be a junkie ninja.
Junkie Ninja.
Dr. Junkie Ninja?
That's right.
That's right. And we are
The
Supernatural Junkies.
Coming at you.
Take 95. Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm super.
And I'm Dr. Kevin, and I'm the natural.
His voice cracked.
I'm Pastor Rob, and I'm still a junkie.
And we are
The
Supernatural
Junkies.
That
Yeah,
wasn't bad.
that's
That was
good.
okay. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Supernatural Junkies. It's Alex yet again. I'm always the first one out of the gate. So we are here today with, I'm not letting him talk. I'm going to interrupt him. Nope. Dr. Kevin, nope. Nope. And Dr. Dennis. Say hi, Dr. Dennis.
Hi, Dr. Dennis.
I knew it every time.
Yes.
Our butts.
It's a tradition now. It's bad guy humor all day long.
Dad jokes for days.
The reason she has to talk first is that way we're allowed to talk after that.
Yes.
They never shut up. Isn't that right? Kevin especially. Just
So I'm actually a little surprised my wife didn't say something about getting Jonna in here to make sure that Dr. Dennis isn't doing too much interrupting.
yeah, we need his wife in on this. Girls versus boys.
That's right. We know who will win.
My tea's about to go off.
I'll let her take my spot.
Exactly.
All right.
Hey, what's that whistling in the background?
That's my tea brew, and it's going to whistle in just a second, so we're going to get started. I am going to read a verse that's appropriate for today, hopefully before the whistle goes off. It's from Matthew 23:33. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell?
Amen.
That's
Amen.
fitting, isn't it?
It is fitting.
Yeah, especially what we're talking about.
So the question is, what were we talking about in the last episode? This is part 2 of the origins of COVID and the union of the snake venom theory, and what is this all really connected to?
I like that, the union of the snake, Duran Duran.
Yes.
Ooh.
I know. That brings back memories. And also how old we are.
When we had hair.
I don't want
Wait a second.
I don't want mine back.
No.
I still have hair, just FYI.
Yes.
That's right. So, what we talked about in the last episode, and if you haven't had a chance to actually listen to Dr. Brian Artis talking about a lot of correlations and similarities between, what's going on with cobra venom, snake venom, and COVID, and also remdesivir, and seeing, what these correlations kind of explore. And he does come out with quite a few things to say, but before we got into that, we went back to something. It was from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Intelligence Council on the updated assessment on COVID-19 origins. What is the government officially saying here? And this was a very contradictory document. They said there was broad agreement that this COVID was not a bioweapon, right? And of course, if you read a definition, you were thinking to yourself, well, it sure sounds like one, right? And a lot of it had to do with the number of people that were killed. But then they were able to say that it was also not genetically engineered. This is really troubling, because in the next thing that they were able to say was that there was a lot of 50-50 splits, essentially, on whether this was something that escaped from Wuhan versus naturally occurring. And let me just tell you, in Wuhan lab, they don't have naturally occurring COVIDs that we would somehow then be able to unable to track them, isolate them, et cetera, et cetera. And so that doesn't make any sense. If you're going to say that Wuhan was a potential source for COVID, then you have to realize that the most logical explanation there is that this has been gain of function. It has been genetically engineered. So how can they say that? But the entire article falls apart at the end when they admit that they absolutely do not have complete samples of COVID. That means they have been telling us there's a virus out here that has caused a pandemic. But somehow this virus, which can be at least 30,000, sequenced peptides, if you will. It can also be fall apart, just suddenly fall apart, and we'll never be able to find out what it is. That's astonishing. That's never happened before, that somehow we can't isolate the virus that actually caused all this. And so you start to realize the entire COVID narrative falls apart once you realize that this was genetically modified and that we don't actually have the virus itself.
Right. They were stumbling over themselves, trying to prove that it wasn't, or opine that it wasn't created in a lab. Meanwhile, I think Dr. Peter Breggin in his book, he had said there are like 7 SARS-CoV viruses that exist, and none of them occur in nature. They're all lab created. And that's why they called it a novel virus.
Right.
Novel meaning new.
Right.
So, if you make it up in a lab, it's
Right.
novel.
Right.
Oh, I thought novel just meant the load of crap they spill about it could fill an entire book. Therefore, it's a novel coronavirus. Watch us as we spin this load of crud.
Yes, well, I think most Americans are feeling that. So once you understand that this is small pieces of something, you start to realize that the gain of function science,
Oh, it's a piece of something.
right?
Sorry.
Their technology is completely able to pull off the perfect crime. And so that's what we liken this to, the fact that, if you pull off the perfect crime, what does it mean? Well, it means the guy is in the room and he's dead. And you can't prove whether this guy was murdered or whether it was a suicide or natural occurring, right? You can't prove what totally happened. And so we start to look for what? Who is this person? Who has motives? What did his death actually accomplish for some of these people, right? And so this means that this entire narrative, we're looking for correlations. We're looking for circumstantial evidence that might lead us to what? More substantial or even concrete evidence.
Well, you got to look at how do you explain this? We have to go outside the room to explain this.
That's right.
So you can't. So it's not like there was a suicide note and the guy's lying there dead with one gunshot wound to his head or something. This guy's lying there, and we're suspicious because we don't have an explanation of how he died,
Right.
and the cause of death is not in the room. So we have to go outside the room. So I think using your analogy there, Doc, you're absolutely right. We got to go outside the room to find the origin of this.
Right. And more distinctly, it is completely okay to go down and explore any line of evidence and anything that could be circumstantial, or as we call, correlations in science. There's a big difference between finding a correlation of something and actually proving causation of something. And so this is something we want to set these ground rules as we go through this. And honestly, this ground rule tells you that this narrative about talking about correlations or similarities between COVID, snake venom, remdesivir, etc., these are all completely valid points of view or roads that we can go down and explore, and then to see what happened. And that's what we found as we went down that road. We found out that there really are a lot of similarities. For example, some of the symptoms of snake venom, especially with respect to some of the organ stuff, seems to be very consistent, with snake venom. The loss of taste and smell, some of the blood clotting. Of course, we also learned that snake venom can be a blood thinner versus a blood clotter. So we start to see some of these organ shutdowns. And of course, we're going to talk about how much that happens, but that is something. There's a correlation there with snake venom. The lungs really ends up being one of the big topics that people dispute. What's happening? Is this being shut down by the brain? But the other thing that happens is some of the things that we treat snake venom bites for are some of the things that we found work great for COVID. For example, right, monoclonal antibodies, that can definitely be considered anti-venom. Hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, NAC blocks blood clotting. Nicotine blocks these receptors in the brain, where the brain some of these snake venoms actually shut down certain receptors in your brain to make you stop breathing. And that's what those nicotinic receptors can do. That's why some of the smokers were less likely to have problems.
And zinc.
Exactly.
Right. He was saying that it binds, that the spike protein binds with the nicotinic receptors in the brainstem, which causes respiratory arrest. But if the smokers, people that have nicotine floating through their blood, have already bound those nicotine receptors with nicotine.
So what we're saying is no one likes a quitter.
Right.
Just kidding. Please don't smoke. Please don't smoke. That's not what we're saying. I was just like, you know what? I quit smoking 20-something years ago. Oh, man. If I had just held on longer.
So, and then he also talks about how some of the symptoms of the treatment of remdesivir actually produce some of the symptoms that we have for COVID. And then he also correlates some of this with the things that you can't use with remdesivir as the things that end up helping to stop COVID. For example, he says one of the big ones was hydroxychloroquine. That's actually listed on there as being something you can't take along with remdesivir. So you're starting to see some very interesting correlations. And of course, he talks about some coincidences just with what, they say. I don't put a lot of stock in it, but, if you look at the Latin version of virus, you could actually use the word venom. And then a corona means what? Crown. What do we put on a crown? We put crowns on who? Kings. Right?
Or
so you start
queens.
to say king
Right.
venom or king snake, right? Or king cobra venom, right? So these are certainly little coincidences that we see happening here. I can't put a lot of stock in it. And that's kind of where we left off, is where some of these coincidences, similarities.
Well, it starts to be like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's all somehow related.
Right, and you also have to try to stay away, the 50-foot view, and try to look at it from that objective point of view, because a lot of these theories, and that's what they are right now, folks, because none of this has been proven either way, is that they are just theories. So we're looking at, okay, there's some correlation, but when you start taking Latin roots of words and trying to make up something in corona, and could they have done that? Sure, they could have. But one thing we do know is what we're going to get into today, Doc, about the PCR test, about and some of the science that we already know that's not valid.
What you're going to see, there's actually some broad agreements about lots of things we're going to bring in up today. And there is nothing wrong with talking about some correlations and some studies, and to say what that proves. But the real bottom line is we see is that, as he goes into this deeper and deeper, the isolation, and one of the things that we jumped off on right away was that, the first video that came out was about what's in the water. And there's no doubt that, and we'll talk about this, how snake venom is still a possibility for some things, but we're having trouble, we can't isolate it in the water. There's really no proof that it's in the water. And so it was kind of an unfortunate thing probably that it was titled that. We know the interview with Mike Adams was a little bit better, where they got into more details. And of course, he's also been on many other podcasts and has had to explain some of these criticisms. And, he did a pretty good job, and I'll be able to jump into some of the things that he was able to answer.
When he was saying in the water, wasn't it the waste products were found in the water?
Yeah,
who tested it? Where'd that come from? I would have to toss that whole theory out for now.
I think that the reality is that most people did, but you have to believe, though, that's where also some sensationalism crept in. And we don't want that. We don't want people scared of the water. Because if that was the case, it would be quite easy to isolate this. Now, he does have other proofs that we talk about, we will get into. But, where we wanted to go is just kind of continue the idea. What is the correlation here, right? How is snake venom related to what's going on right now? And I think that that's where you have to really look at, once you understand that all we have are a bunch of little small parts at the scene of the accident. That's all we have. So looking at any of these parts is certainly a possibility that it could lead somewhere, and that would also include snakes or snake venom. Remember, snakes were always considered to be one of the top 3 sources for COVID anyways. So that part is not really much of a stretch. We also know that there's tons and tons of research by the companies that are pulling all this off anyways into the whole snake venoms and the types of things that we can do. And the other thing, the last thing I'll mention, is that they can absolutely synthesize brand new snake venoms that are not naturally occurring at all, that if we saw them, we wouldn't know what they were, because they're brand new inventions. So they are able to engineer snake venoms that we don't even know about yet. So these are all kind of the ground games before we jump into it.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Doc. I mean, when Mike Adams was interviewing him, he did a good job because he has a science background, and Dr. Artis actually had a bunch of his research presented during those interviews. But Mike Adams was saying that they are using snake venom, or have used snake venom, for many pharmaceuticals like lisinopril, which is an ACE2 inhibitor, and it's also being used in cosmetics. So it's been used for years.
Right. We were talking about, Goop was mentioning something about the snake venom as early as 2010, 2011. So it's been a long time. But some of the effects of the snake venom is that they're used in some cancer therapies, and different venoms have the opposite effect on the same system. So like we're talking, some are for clotting and some thin, right? King Cobra, Kevin pointed out, is like a blood thinner, and the crate snake is for clotting, causes clotting. Let's see, venom-derived neurotoxins target nicotine. We already talked about this. Smokers least affected, right? Nicotine patches and gum helps, right? If you get it,
right?
And because it has some, I don't know.
Well, what happens is that you have the receptor. The receptors are in the brainstem. Okay, that's the connection between the brain and the spinal cord, transition area. That's where your breathing centers are. So that's the area that's crushed when someone is hung. All right, physically crushed by the axis, fractured and going into that area of the brain, causing paralysis of the diaphragm. These nicotinic receptors, if they are bound by nicotine in smokers, then they cannot be bound by venom. There's the protection.
Okay.
And this is also the correlation, because people
That's
know that, people with COVID stop breathing. So the idea here is that a snake venom could literally tell their brain to stop breathing, which is why we need what? The
Smokers.
Ventilators.
Oh, sorry. I thought you
Right, but I
smokers.
think he was saying, was this happening, though, was he relating that to the hospital deaths, or was that just COVID? Because COVID, people were infected with COVID, and not everybody ended up with a cytokine storm. In fact, most of the people that ended up were in the hospital were already that far gone when it affected their lungs and so forth. So I wasn't clear on what he was saying there.
Well, we're going to hear that other people believe that the cytokine storm happens because the lungs shut down. Brian Artis believes the other way around. He believes that this was all triggered by a reaction to snake venom. But then again, it still comes down to that these people stop breathing. And so this is why the idea of the ventilators comes in. And this is something that he explains that does shut down these receptors. That's how nicotine comes into play. And it's true that nicotine has been used as, a type of treatment that's actually helped here. So it's really important. Another criticism here that we'll bring up is that some people are saying that, well, wait a minute, if this is snake venom, how did they deliver it? So this is a big question, because if you think about if it was really in the water, some people are saying that snake venom, if you ingest it, is not something that could hurt us. And that's really important to understand that, first of all, we already talked about one lady that, stopped breathing because she was just sucking snake venom out of a couple of people. She had to be put on a ventilator. So we know that you can ingest snake venom and it can hurt people. But the other side of it is I think you were talking about Judy Mikovits, and how she was saying that there is a possibility that ingested snake venom could hurt people.
Right. Well, especially with retroviruses, they can be aerosolized, right? Which we know that was one of the initial proposals for the coronavirus to DARPA as a weapon, was to be able to aerosolize this virus.
Right.
Yeah.
And you think about this, once you start to get into gain of function, we're going to tend to think in lines of thinking but we're not experts in what's actually truly available. So the point here is that, and I think Dr. Artis brings this up, that he says there's multiple companies that say you can nanotech basically venoms, and to where it is quickly absorbed when you ingest it and gets into your bloodstream, and it accomplishes the same thing.
Hypothesis, though. I mean, we're keeping a 50-foot view, but that's he's theorizing these things and ingesting it versus getting in the blood. When you talk about sucking venom out of a snake bite to try to save someone's life, and then you getting sick yourself, that's because there's a lot of salivary glands in the mouth that you can sublingually absorb it into your bloodstream. You know how you do sublingual medication, right? Underneath the tongue, it goes into the bloodstream quickly. So it's not that I wouldn't think you're gonna ingest it that like swallow it like you would drink a glass of water. Right. So I think we just need to back off a little bit and let's look at what he's saying here.
Well, all I'm saying is that none of us and no one, there is no one that knows what's really possible that's been interviewed that I know of. There's not too many people in the world that are announcing, hey, I do a lot of gain of function research and I will tell you what's really truly available. And this is why, to me, there's no doubt about it. We're talking about peptides here. And we're talking about really small chains of them. And again, if they can make them smaller, they can easily make them absorbed wherever and or possibly aerosolized. So you start to realize that we're on the downside of this. We are not forensic experts here about what's even possible, and that's why it's hard to pin this down, which is why all you can say is it is a theory, right?
Yes.
But we do have some people that are saying it is possible, and that's key. The other thing that comes out here is that he does a lot of, if you really watch the interviews, he goes into a lot of things and shows you how there is a correlation. And that's really where I can say he does a good job. He does talk about CNN Health actually mentions this correlation, or somehow the origins are related. And he also mentions how it's specifically the Chinese cobra as a source. He talks about how some of the proteins that are being found are similar to snakes. He talks about a study that came out of Science Today. It says it's not snakes, but they do admit that some of the virus codons are probably most similar to a snake. So again, you start to see we're getting to a little bit of technological things that it's difficult for the average person to understand, which tells you what? The people that understand this are people that do what? Gain of function research, right? Now, snake bites and COVID-19, he also talks about a research development opportunity, and this was with the BMJ, and he was just basically saying that there is research into snake bites and COVID, right? And this was covered by the British Journal of Medicine. There's also a couple other inventors that have used snake venom to create mRNA vaccines, and this was for gene therapy. So now all of a sudden, he shows a little correlation that snake venoms have been used to help stabilize the mRNA. And so that's also another correlation.
Yeah, that's correct, Doc. And then we have the correlation with the PCR test, where Artis was saying that they were using the PCR test years ago in the lab to identify the codons of the venoms. And then now when they release this product, and we're going to say product because we don't know if it's a virus because we don't have an isolated form of it, and we don't know what's in the treatments of like remdesivir, because we don't have that, but they release these products and they testing positive on the PCR test. So there's a similarity there with the venoms.
Yeah, so there's just some correlations happening. Overlapping venoms have been used with PCR tests. Venoms have been used with mRNA. So we're starting to see that these things are not necessarily always far apart. One of the things that comes out is the fact that they can synthesize venoms that do not exist. And that's also been part of the things that we're seeing. These are loose correlations for me, but he talks about how some of the vaxes are mixed in powders like Venom and remdesivir. He talks about the coloring, can be similar. But again, to me, those are loose associations probably for me. He talks about how cleaving is inhibited by glutathione, cysteine, and ascorbic acid. So he talks about how some, ascorbic acid, glutathione, again, can inhibit this venom reaction.
Okay, I just found this. This is crazy. This is from GLP. It's online, and it says how snake venom and a smoking cessation drug inspired a nasal spray that blocks COVID. And this is a drug, by the way, by working with Pfizer, and it's also in a repurposed version of Chantix, which we've all seen the commercials for, right? And that is a Pfizer product as of 2006, and it looks like they were looking into this as early as 2004, folks.
There's another thing he brings up about snake venom, and it's the phosphodiesterase, which can cleave RNA. So when you're working with, incorporating RNA, mRNA into the body, that's a little bit of an issue. He mentions a company called Biologic E, and all that really he shows with a lot of this stuff is that a lot of the companies that are putting out these drugs and or vaccines are clearly also working with snake venom, and that's probably the best way to say some of that. One other study I thought that was interesting, and I guess this came out in the Canadian press, was from a Moderna co-founder. He was using mRNA technology as part of treating venomous snake bites. So again, not only, do monoclonal antibodies work here, but other things as well. But it turns out there's another correlation here.
Which Moderna founder is this?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I wonder.
and here's the other thing. He draws quite a few connections of some of these companies, and he also connects some of them to the, the World Economic Forum, that these are the globalists who are in control of all this stuff. So, when you start to think about the crime, we talked about that initially, in the world, who would be the one that benefits the most from this crime scene in Wuhan? Well, China is certainly not one of the top ones. But when you start to look what it took to pull it off in America, you just can't believe that China is so in control of America.
And I'm sorry, did you say whore in charge or who are in charge? Could have been either. Oh.
The Babylonian whore.
Right.
Right. Well, you start to realize it, and in biblical times, the whore was actually somebody that used to be married and faithful, right? And you start to realize it's somebody that's been, that's really fallen.
I think that, and Peter Brecken, going back to his book, he had some good documentation there. But one thing that he did point out is that it's not just China; it's the globalists. China is the globalist beta test.
Right,
because since they're a communist country and then in bed with the WHO, they're able to do all their testing and stuff there. They were the perfect straw man to be put out there. But really, the globalists are the ones that are involved here, and Fauci, Gates, and Klaus Schwab. They're all the ones that are behind this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and we can know that from just the things that they put out, and we will cover that on some other episodes. But what I'm trying to say is, it's very difficult to explain how China's in control of the FDA, the CDC, completely in control of virtually all the politicians in America, completely in control of all the media in America. Think about what it took to pull off the COVID deception. It becomes harder to explain how China really has that far of a reach. It's much easier to see how the globalists have that far reach.
Right.
Oh, especially if you go to the World Economic Forum's website and pull up and search for coronavirus, and they have this whole diagram there with all these different legs to it that how they planned this whole thing and the response to it. It's problem, action, solution. Yep. I could see it right now, though. Can't you see Dr. Fauci on the stand? It'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about there, Dr. Cruz. You don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know science. This is science. I don't actually have proof, but I can tell you it's science.
Well, this is what's funny to me is that they come out and tell you that this is their goal. You look at the Rockefeller Step Plan, you look at that Event 201, you look at the World Economic Forum, and this is all spelled out. And this is the stuff we do need to cover so you can start to see. These people are telling you who they are,
right,
what they want to do, and how they're going to actually accomplish it.
And also look to China, though. Who looks to China as a role model for anything? right?
Well, they're teaching our Utes, as they say in the
Right.
Utes. They're the ones that want to be like China.
Which
yes,
is
socialism, communism rules.
scary.
Yeah.
Well, he brought up
Oh,
a really
Trudeau.
interesting
He admires them.
correlation, in the idea that they like to tell each other what they're going to do under code, right? And I can show you other illustrations. He covers one that I actually thought was quite interesting, which was an episode of the Blacklist show.
Right. What was that? That was season 4, episode 15, where what's his name? Reddington. We love that show. Love James Spader. He's a great actor. But he came down with this mysterious poison. Nobody knew what was going on, but he was going to die if they couldn't figure it out.
And he was treated with a cocktail of steroids.
That's right. But what it turned out to be was it Crate Venom or King Cobra Venom? I think it might have been
Well,
Crate.
it goes on. I mean, he was treated with bronchodilators.
Yeah.
He actually says in there that he was surrounded by a corona of death.
Yeah.
And you're like, how is that? How is that?
Are you saying there's predictive programming?
This is them
Cool
showing off.
propaganda, people. Look it up.
I just can't. I mean, there's no doubt. There's a lot of coincidences, but these guys, they wouldn't mind, doing something blatant enough to say,
Oh, they do.
Oh,
They do
no,
it on
they-
The Simpsons.
They spent 8.
don't criticize the Simpsons.
But they do. But
They
there
spent-
has been a lot of
But they
predictive
told you they
programming
spent
on The Simpsons.
$8 million in advertising. Those drug companies. Did you know that?
Oh, I heard it's larger than that.
Yeah, I think
I
I
heard
think
it's 16 million a day.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Try competing with that as in
You can't,
being
yeah.
a chiropractor.
So they're in everywhere. They're in shows, right? And they've said that. They've said
yeah.
as much that they've planted themselves.
Oh,
Gates was part of
absolutely.
this, putting in television shows, the news programs, paying for all the
Just like
news.
they did
It's
with
crazy.
the
Well,
other
that
agendas.
That Reddington show, the other part I thought that was interesting is that it turned out to be, like you said, it was, peptide proteins from the crate snake, which means that it was a venom. But it affected what? His lungs.
Yeah.
He couldn't breathe.
Yep.
So you start to think, like, okay, I mean, if I was Dr. Artist and I saw that, I would be like, holy smokes, right? So, again, we just look at these coordinations or correlations, whatever you want to call them, and you start to realize,
Coordinated correlations.
That's right.
yeah,
It's a coordinated attack, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And they have to, part of the occult practice is that they have to announce what they're going to do.
Yes, and you start to realize, look, Luciferace is patent 060606. I mean, they literally have to put this out there and announce it. He talks about long COVID, and how that's caused, these organ damages, and he talks about these elevated D dimers that are happening. And of course, these can also be something, that we can see with different venoms.
Right. Well, the D-dimer test, if you go get a D-dimer test, it could test if you have a clotting problem. So then, so if you're thinking you're having symptoms of this, folks, you can go get your doctor to order you a D-dimer test.
Well, he says Dr. Ryan Cole, when I did get to meet him when he was here in Florida doing the Save a Generation tour. I didn't get a chance. Actually, my wife was there too, but she was over talking to other people, bragging to them.
Yeah, no, I'm not social. Kevin's a social butterfly. He's like, here, you should have met this one, this one, this one. I'm like, I'm good.
Well, let's face it. We have a distinct message here with the Supernatural Junkies, and it's really simple. Jesus said, when you see these things happen, we're supposed to stand up. And I do not care about going to talk to important people, but if I believe that my Bible is saying something's happening and I need to stand up for it, I will talk to people I have never wanted to talk to them before.
Yeah, he did say that there would be pestilences, right, in the end times, right? And now we're in the birth pains analogy, where that it's becoming more concentrated as we're seeing.
Well, and here's another thing. My biggest hole, first of all, was, of course, the water. I will tell you that I've had a few conversations with Dr. Lee Merritt, and there's more than one people that have been thinking that maybe this isn't something that's aerosolized at all. And she has been calling it a poison for a while. So you can see other people have been thinking in this direction. Obviously, there's going to be some, disagreements with what, her and Dr. Artis are saying exactly. However, the second biggest hole I had was he does not show. If you think about agreement, most people are in agreement that the problem is the spike protein, right? And so he never correlates the venom to the spike protein. And we're going to see, I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder, but we're going to cover Dr. Pierre Corey's critique of this as well. And he specifically brings a few things out about how snake venom has a correlation to the spike protein. The other thing that really, of course, when you think about from our perspective, we believe that the Bible teaches there was going to be a genetic war, and that we were going to see that war come back at the last moments of human history, which means really a DNA war, right? A war for the seed or offspring of humanity. And so we base that on, of course, the first prophecy in the Bible, Genesis, the 3rd chapter. But then Jesus saying that as in the days of Noah, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man. So here's what I'm trying to say. When we took this mRNA in our body, we know that mRNA can go what? Backwards to our DNA, right? So we're talking about a genetic experiment that people were manipulated, bullied, and forced into taking, right? That is literally changed. It's going to change the DNA from everybody here on out. These lipid nanoparticles, I call them my goodness, lipid nanoparticles, they pool specifically in these reproductive organs, right? So you're talking about, now, let's just say there's something to this. Okay, he talks about, would it be interesting if somehow snake DNA, distinct snake codes have been placed into people's bodies. Now, there's a reason why we'll say that, and again, I don't want to steal Dr. Pierre Corey's thunder, but we're going to read some of that as well. But I just wanted you to know that was one of my... I just struggle with that. How is this connected to the spike protein? Because most people would say that the injury seems to be in the spike protein. And that's why we're seeing a lot of...
They did identify that. The Salk Institute identified that last year.
That's right.
And that the spike protein is what causes the problem. And then you and I asked the question, well, then why would you inject into your body a medication, it's not a vaccine, that tells your body, programs your body to produce spike protein? And now we're seeing the consequence of that in that you have people that are clotting. You have athletes dropping on the field. You have myocarditis occurring in adolescent males. You're having much more concentrated issues with prion disease that are starting to show up. That's with the brain, folks, protein problems with the brain. So where is this all coming from? And they're not correlating this with the vaccine. They're never going to say it's the vaccine because that would make them guilty. They're going to say it's COVID. And they're going to continue the narrative with COVID through the PCR test, which is bogus, which we debunked months ago.
Millions of times.
And yes, millions of times. So if you can test positive with a PCR test, which is bogus, we've told you have to stop playing the game. We have to stop playing their game. Stop calling this a vaccine. Stop taking PCR tests.
Stop calling it a virus.
And stop calling it a virus, and stop cooperating with their narrative.
Right. And here's the thing. So I'm going to say this now before we even go into some of the critiques of this. But one of the things that if you heard the Stu Peters one, and then you hear the Mike Adams one, and then you hear some other ones, he's really balanced his approach. He just sounds to me like he's pretty well put together at this point.
For Dr. Artis?
Dr. Artis. He's really come off of some of the things he's saying, and he explained why and how. The truth is, while he did air some of these ideas, he didn't air them to the people that have expertise. And that's the best way I want to say it. And when you do that, that's when you're going to get certain types of things back. And so I want to say that I think everything he did was fine. I know that if he had went in different directions and vetted things a little bit more with his colleagues, he would have come across less sensationalistic right out of the box. And I think that that's the case. So let me just when he was asked, okay, where's your proof? Okay, this is the best one he had. He mentions a study in Italy, and unfortunately I heard this on a podcast that it was not video, so I wasn't able to find this study. It just says that it was an Italy study, and it was in 2020. It took people with COVID that were testing positive on the PCR, and it was looking for animal toxins in their blood. And it turns out they found some, and a lot of them turns out to were snake venom or snake drive or other things that would be very similar. I think one of them, I don't know, I want to say starfish, but anyways, so you start to realize that in the animal world, there's so many things that we could be dealing with, and all we have is a bunch of parts. So this starts to make sense that these people did find this stuff. So, other than that, what does he say? He has no evidence that there's anything in the water. He also goes on to say that he's wrong about the water. He was not trying to promote fear. Certainly there are other people that have proposed problems in the water. We have chlorine in the water. We have fluoride in the water. You start to see, and he's not the only person that's really questioning whether this is aerosolized to begin with. That's not a real uncommon, thought, because you really have to ask yourself, if it was aerosolized, then why did it act the way that it did? So you start to realize that Dr. Ardis, has tempered his approach quite dramatically, and I think that's based upon some of the feedback. So, hats off to him. We're not throwing anybody under the bus here. From our perspective, it's completely okay to really talk about that.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely. He's come off a little bit sensational in the beginning, like you said, and then he's corrected some of the statements that he made, and some statements that he made were mistaken. Like the water thing, there was something about waste products in the water and so forth. But the whole thing is that, again, we're looking at the room. There's a bunch of pieces on the floor, and we're trying to make sense of this, and it's very difficult.
And I think that's a perfect explanation, and we got to give each other a little bit of leeway. That's why this is a talk show. So let me introduce Dr. Pierre Corey. I did get to meet him again at the same. My wife did as well. Oh wait, you were talking to someone again. And
such a butt.
Long story short, he is one of the lead doctors for America's Frontline Doctors. He is one of the guys that was on the White House steps standing up for our freedoms. And there are very few people that are losing their jobs and willing to do these kinds of things and lose their license. And that is Dr. Pierre Corey. So we need to give some respect there. Just remember now, he is not a chiropractor. He is a...
All right, Doc, let me help you there. Pierre Corey, Kory, is a physician. He's a medical doctor. He is an American critical care physician who gained attention during the COVID-19 pandemic for advocating widespread off-label use of certain drugs as treatments for COVID-19, as president and co-founder of the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. So he was pushing or promoting the use of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, I believe.
And he got his notoriety really saying that while they're allowing them to use corticosteroids, he was showing them, the world really, that the doses that they were using were negligible, that they really were being mistreated because the dosage was completely inappropriate. And he was proven to be right. He was fired for that, I believe. But, you have a guy here that is literally the head of his unit. So he could be, looking over the whole emergency medical situation, and then also maybe the hospice and so on and so forth. So this guy is seeing it happen, and he's one of the guys behind making these decisions. Now, the best way to state it, he totally agrees that there's some truth, some partial truths, and so on and so forth, and some complete mistakes in what Brian is saying. From his perspective. And he also says that he has personally disagreed with people like Peter McCulloch and Malone and Cole and Urso and so on and so forth. So he's not saying he's God here. He's just saying that I have a different perspective. And the first one is that he does not believe that there's zero basis for COVID, people dying of COVID because of paralysis. That's just not what he sees happening. He doesn't believe that there's any sinister intent really to stop the breathing. Okay, So he believes this is coming from a complex pneumonia. He also says there's some discrepancy. I know Dr. Brian Ardis talks about how there's this dropping of COVID patients on the 9th day on remdesivir. He gives some different statistics that really are saying that a third die in less than 4 days, a fifth die between 5 to 8 days, and the rest die beyond 9+ days. He also talked about how remdesivir was not around until May of 2020. And he does say, he is not a fan of remdesivir. He absolutely would agree with Dr. Ardis that this is basically a bad medication and so forth. But he also says that he did not see a huge rise in the deaths after remdesivir was started. Another thing he mentions is that, I guess he does make a little bit of a case saying that monitoring the wastewater can actually be a valid technique for predicting outbreaks. Now, I really didn't fully understand what he was saying, but most of us don't. But he is saying that it does seem to have some predictive value. They also talks about how banning doctors for using monoclonal antibodies. Really, what Dr. Pierre brings out is that they've been fired. Letters have been sent to medical boards. And again, insurance companies have been investigating them, again, for prescribing off-label use of different things. So, he goes, there's clearly some, not only does he agree there, but, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what the doctors that are fighting for these other alternative treatments to COVID what's really been happened to them.
It's interesting because they use drugs off-label all the time. So I don't know why all of a sudden they're going to get fired for this. He also talked about how there's indeed a short sequence of RNA coding for amino acids that make up part of the receptor binding domain portion of the spike protein that is identical to snake venom. So that's pretty interesting. But again, I'd love to see some of the research on this. And then he talked about how part of the spike protein may potentially make it antagonistic to the nicotinic receptors that we were talking about earlier, and that the mechanism, the pathophysiological mechanism, which is one of the many exhibited by snake venom. So he's seeing a correlation between what the artist was saying with snake venom and the nicotinic receptors. The virus or the venom and or remdesivir venom causes pulmonary hemorrhage. This is a problem. He was thinking that he doesn't see the proof that remdesivir is causing the pulmonary hemorrhage. There has been some studies that it being indicated in kidney damage, however. And then he was saying that there was some virus venom and or remdesivir venom causes ARDS initially. ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome. It does not. He doesn't feel that that is related, so he's debunking that theory right there. Again, these are things that need more research, folks.
So one of the big things that he said, and this to me was stunning, he says that a bit of truth here, because there is indeed a short sequence of RNA coding for amino acids that make up part of the receptor binding domain portion of the spike protein. Now, did you just hear what he said? He says it's identical to snake venom. Why, on the spike protein, is there a binding receptacle that's identical to snake venom? Now, this is something that could be explored because this one little binder to snake venom protein, right, that's also similar here to what we have with the spike protein, could be why we're seeing so many correlations or similarities to the way COVID's acting in snake venom. So, and the question is then becomes, as he says later, why is it there? How did it get there? That's a question to be asking the NIH and specifically Mr. Fauci. So here you have this one little nugget.
Hey, don't question me there, Dr. Cruz.
That's right. So like you start to see here, this is the building block of where this whole thing started. Because here you have two docs that are going to see this quite a bit differently, but you have this one little connection of agreement here. And to me, the spike protein is something that everybody can agree is clearly a component of what's going on here. So the fact that this has snake venom on it, what is that an indication? How did it get there? You got to be thinking this is what? Gain of function.
So, in looking at some of the other ways they've been using snake venom, because I heard recently that Pfizer just invested a ton of money in looking at snake venoms and what they can do. But apparently, the Mayo Clinic has been studying and looking at them for heart attack patients, for people going into renal failure, and also using it for, microbial keratitis.
Keratosis?
It just says keratitis. It kind of shortens it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. But they're saying that they were bee stings. They used to use bee stings as an alternative for eye infections, but now they're looking at venom to inject directly into the eye to treat.
To try to what?
I guess.
Because, I mean, they're using it in cosmetics similar to Botox, so
Right,
it
but
does cause some paralysis of muscles and so forth.
Well, they're treating it microbial keratitis, which it must be in the eye, a bacteria, so they're using snake venom and injecting it directly into the eye to fight that. I know it's kind of
Do you
weird.
get snake eyes then?
Yeah, snake eyes.
Well, you can see here that the general principle, folks, is very simple. The scene of the crime has nothing but very, very small little components. And you can see that all the people, the players, are using snake venom. There's all kinds of correlations happening here.
Yeah, there's
but
something.
again, to try and pin everything down, but this idea that there is a specific receptor on the spike protein that comes from a snake is a very powerful piece of information.
It had to come from outside the room. It had to be put there.
That's
Right.
right.
You know, so it's, again, like you said,
I mean, there's wacky.
gain of function evidence.
Yeah, there's wacky things in vaccines. Period. I mean, worm DNA, cocker spaniel DNA,
Aluminum.
cloned fetal tissue from
Formaldehyde.
40, from 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's really sick.
Bovine stuff, eggs.
And
right?
they don't
Burn the shell.
have to test it like they test medications. You know that? So
Right,
all
'cause it's already
vaccines, not
approved.
just no, I'm not. We're talking about the childhood vaccines.
Oh, yeah.
They're not tested like
Yeah.
medication is tested.
Right.
And then if you get sick, you get good luck at the court.
Oh, well, since 1986, there's nothing you can do about that.
Crazy,
Yeah.
folks.
Oh well, too bad, so sad.
Well, I know we're getting a little long here, but I wanted to go back and say a couple things. Number one, he says that the virus venom or remdesivir, okay, he says the idea that this causes pulmonary hemorrhage is wrong. And he's also said that this pulmonary hemorrhage, right, this isn't something he's never actually seen. So you're seeing there's a practical side of this that just doesn't pan out for Dr. Pierre Corey. Another thing he talks about how, and again, this is Dr. Artis really kind of insinuating that remdesivir is just free-dry snake venom, okay? Again, he's saying that this multiple organ failure is somewhat rare. And again, this is where we're going to see different statistics depending on who you talk to. But he says it's more likely that it's actually a single organ failure related to the respiratory. Because occasionally the kidneys do come into play here. So, you'll see some arguments up and down, depending on who much, when, where, why these organs are actually being involved. But the bottom line is,
He said, "Who much?"
Who much?
Yeah, but you can also, Doc, I mean, just even if, let's say, there's proof that remdesivir causes kidney problems or damage, you damage the kidney, you cause multiple organ failure. I saw it in the passing of my brother-in-law. The kidneys shut down, and that just shuts everything else down.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father. That's how he died.
Yeah.
Well, here's another thing. You know why we're having so many arguments right now and how many disagreements? Because I'm telling you, there's more than one thing going on.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And remember, we got so many parts to play, right? I'm telling you, anybody was shocked by all the funny things that they're claiming somehow people are dying from, right? And somehow it's related to COVID. Remember also, in the last 2 quarters of last year, we're seeing about a 40% increase of non-COVID deaths. Something's going on,
Life
folks,
insurance.
right?
Right.
Life
You see
insurance
that?
claims,
Why
right?
are 18 to 65-year-olds, the deaths up 40%? It's unheard of. Something is going on here, and I think that's what we can roll out. The other thing that, again, Dr. Pierre Corey completely agrees, remdesivir is a major problem. But he didn't say for himself, he didn't see a discernible difference in how patients were dying. And I think that that's important to know from somebody that was in those hospitals watching it happen.
Absolutely. But I think artist wasn't making the point that he was hypothesizing that remdesivir was a similar compound or looked similar to snake venom in color and so forth. He had no proof.
Yeah.
He didn't get a bottle of it and test it in a lab. I mean, so these are hypotheses that need to be proved or disproved.
Yes, and so he does say some of these can happen in some cases, but again, it's really hard because some of those cases from his perspective were a little bit rare. So I think the other thing he says that he didn't see a big change before and after remdesivir. He says these lots of kidney injury was happening before it came out. He said that they were even going on dialysis. He felt it was maybe a little less after remdesivir came out. He does agree that there was some blood clotting, but he's never seen blood clotting like he did with the first Wuhan strain. And he also, of course, says that clotting really is an issue with some snake bites. As we talked about, others can be even thinner. So there is this correlation that people can go, yes, there is a similarity between things that are happening here.
But at some point, you have to look at all of this. I mean, all of it. And, you know, the fact that you can just go back and, well, COVID causes this. What kind of virus is this that does that? I mean, in history, just think about that. It's so wide-ranging, the symptoms, the symptomology, what it can do to you. Come on, this is ridiculous. Does that sound normal? Does it sound natural? Does it sound or man-made?
Well, I think the narrative just keeps on going and changing.
That's why it's a novel coronavirus.
I don't know what you're talking about there, Alex. There's nothing wrong. This is corona. It's coronavirus.
Everything. It can shut down your kidneys. It can change your sex. It can do all sorts of things. Just
Yeah,
roll with it. Roll with it.
it morphs into the super duper coronavirus.
It's crazy.
I don't know. It is crazy, and I do appreciate Pierre's critique and artists' opinions and so forth, but you have to look at it from all sides here, and we don't know. Like we were talking about earlier, the media is on one side, and then you have the alt media on the other side, and you have all these opinions and hypotheses, and you know, there's just so much out there, so much noise. It's hard to make sense of it all.
Right. It's like misinformation. It's like misinforming the misinformed, right? It's just, it's like a table of cards.
And in the end times, there will be a great deception that comes about.
It's the ultimate deception.
You know, I mean, when you can't tell the truth, it's deception. And that's why we say we have to have a love for the truth. We have to continue and persevere through this.
Right. I think our point is like, you know, in looking out for people, right, for all of us, and just saying that, look, whatever this is, however this ends, that the vaccine doesn't lead to something good. It's not helpful. If you have to get it every 3 months, how is that helping you? It's not even building up your immune system because you're not immune to anything then. You still catch it. You know, so in the end, I guess what we're saying is that, you know, the vaccine is still unsafe. What it is, how this is, what, you know, COVID is, it's still all a mystery, but it all sounds like lies.
Right.
You know, that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? Because that's why every day Fauci is changing his mind. Just today he said, oh, this is endemic now, which means you're going to have to learn to live with it. Yeah, isn't that what we always said? Duh.
Right. Yeah, there's a point where you have to realize that anybody can figure out this is a deception. I'm going to go back to something else Dr. Corey said. You know, this is a major mistake, really. You know, Brian is mentioning a particular article and about how comparing China to America and how remdesivir is probably the source of this kidney failure. But like he says, the paper he cites, you know, was actually published in May of 2020. Okay, that was before remdesivir was even in use. So there's semantical things, you know, that are happening here. You can't, you know, say that just because it's the right color, just because it's, you know, a powder somehow, you know, and same thing, he talks about how probably there's 2 snake venoms, but we have no idea. But then the fact that there's 2 snakes on the caduceus symbol, you know, so these are some things that, you have to say these are not strong correlations, for most people.
Would you say the Caduceus symbol or the Medusa symbol? I heard Medusa. That fits. She's got snakes on her head.
That's right.
Snakes on her wig.
Yeah.
Just saying.
So he does admit that there could be a role of the nicotinic acid, but again, he just feels that claiming that COVID-19 illness is identical to what happens to snake victims is just something that you wouldn't say if you've been treating both of those people groups. And, so that's where some of the correlation really starts to fall through here, that, you can only take correlation so far.
Okay, folks, every time one of us, especially Kevin or Dr. Dennis, says correlation, take a drink. See how you end up at the end of this show.
It's like, hi, Bob.
That's right.
Hello, Bob.
You either tea, whatever you're drinking, you either have to use the restroom really badly or something else.
We're not promoting you take a drink of adult beverages.
No, but if you do, don't drive after
Please
the show.
don't.
So you're all going to be rizzing a restroom very soon.
Rizzing a restroom?
I don't know what you're talking about there, Alex.
Correlation. Check our
Correlation. There's no correlation between the VAERS and what's happening out there. No correlation. Yeah, you may have like 25,000 people who died on VAERS, but there's no correlation.
And how did they fill that out if they were dead, huh? Answer me that.
Don't tell me that the medical doctors had to be involved with recording this.
Please.
Because, they don't have time for that.
Well, and I think, the best way to sum up what Dr. Pierre is saying is he thinks, and I'm going to quote this, that had Dr. Artis simply come up with the hypothesis or evidence as to why there are amino acid sequences identical to bungaroo toxin in the spike protein RBD, which is the binding site of the RNA, that would have been fine and is a great question for Fauci and the Wuhan lab. So here you have the central core of the whole thing. Why is this there? There's multiple agreements, not only just correlation, but there's something here that's very similar that can be sequenced. And so, we drop out of this and we go, why did America do the worst? Why did we do the worst in the world? That's a good question, right?
Well, I have another. What is the bungaroo, Dr. Fauci?
I don't know what you're talking about there, Dr. Pierre Corey. Bungaroo toxin, what is that? I have no idea.
We can neither confirm nor deny the bungaroo.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Well, and I guess, he would be an expert probably about what is possible. We clearly weren't going to get any truth out of him. But the truth is these are bioweapons. When you look at what was accomplished with COVID, that we are now number 2 in the world, that we lost a seating president,
we're number 2.
We lost rights to their own body around the world, which is exactly what our Bibles told us the beast government really wants, access to our bodies, So you start to think about this.
Remember, if you want my body and you think I'm sexy, come watch your lamp me know.
So, we got a bunch of parts here. They've been researching venoms extensively. There's an inverse relationship and similarities between remdesivir, COVID, snake venom, and all of this stuff. So these crossover solutions could be used to help people. Maybe something that worked for one could work for the other. Remdesivir is a problem. I mean, most people are agreeing with that. We are seeing strange things happen from a respiratory illness. Kidneys are failing. So the problem is that we're seeing these similarities, and all we have is a bunch of little small particles called peptides. So I think that's where the biggest mistake we can make is that this is one thing we're dealing with. And I think that's why we're having controversy, because I think there's more than one thing going along. I think snake venom is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, there's multiple things going on here, and we don't know. We just have pieces, like you said, so pieces of the pie that we can't put it all back together again. We need to have some science here. Folks, when you do science or scientific experiments, you start off with a hypothesis, and then you start going through your experiment to disprove or prove your hypothesis. We don't have any of that going on here. We never did. It's all been hearsay. It's all been this. None of this would stand up in a court of law. It's all portions and parts and mixed pieces, and then we're trying to make sense of it here. We're really just trying to follow the truth
science?
throughout this.
We're trying to follow the science. You got to follow the science.
I think that's part of it is like this whole programming, follow the science. Well, they're not actually allowing science to happen. Right. And so that's the problem.
There
But
is
just
no
by
science.
saying it over and over, like it makes somehow people believe it. I also think that this whole thing, since it started, we've had to redefine what the word insanity means. It used to be, right, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result.
Correct.
But we don't no longer define insanity that way because we are doing the same thing over and what's happening. And so now that's not insane. That's just science.
That's normality now.
Right? That's
Right.
just
So you went from being insane to normal. So insane is normal.
Right. And so you can't question that. You can't say, why are we doing this? This is not working. Well, they keep telling us this is science. This is how it's supposed to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's insulting, frankly. If you're a thinking person, this whole thing is just maddening.
Well, and you can see why. I mean, this was a little bit of a tedious episode in some ways, but the reality is that until you realize that we don't actually have a virus, that all we got is a bunch of little parts. Now we got to become microscopic in our thinking, and that is annoying, right? We all want one big culprit here, but the accident can't do that. We all wanted a quick and easy out. This was a crime, or this was just an accident. This was just a suicide, whatever it was. And the reality is that, this is 2.5 years later, and we don't have that.
There's too many players.
There's too many players, too many ingredients, and so this is the reality of the situation. But it is fair to say that there's something going on that could be connected to snakes.
Well, I think we also have to say that because of that, because there's, you can't go back and prove this. I don't think no matter what we find, even if it does appear to be true, you're still never going to be able to go back to the macro level and find out who, what, where, when, how. And I just think we just need to stand up and say enough is enough. I think that's the point is, like, because we're never going to know the full truth. There's going to be too many players involved that we just all have to say, this is enough. We've had it. No more.
Well, I think that's happening. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people
I
have
hope.
had it, and I think that's where all the rebellion against the masks have come from.
Yeah.
I think that there are
All 5 of you in Guyana. Woo! Yeah,
a
thanks.
lot of people, a
5
lot of
listeners.
people are not going to get booster shots. They've
Yeah.
been, they may have gotten the vaccine, but they're not going to do a booster or so forth. But now we're unfortunately still stuck in the narrative with, as long as they're still using the PCR test, which does not test for COVID. Right. How many times do I have to say that?
Well, not only does the PCR test, if that isn't accurate, and we know it isn't, not only does the narrative crumble, but that the origin story itself crumbles. And now we suddenly know. And do you know that there is not one, expert in the field of gain of function that's actually out there telling us what's actually even possible? All these doctors, right? There's nobody in gain of function that's come forward and said, let me tell you what we can do here.
Well,
Well,
they wanted to destroy the origins because by
Yeah.
destroying the origins, they're destroying the evidence.
That's right.
Now-
And then now it is not an act of terrorism.
Right.
It's just something that's
Oh,
an
I don't know
accident.
how this happened.
Well, it's amazing that the people that we do know are in charge of gain of function, like you said, have been silent.
That's
oh,
right.
yeah.
They want to be as under the radar as possible.
And Mikovits might be one of the closest to that, and she doesn't exactly work in that area. But here's what we can all agree on. We can agree that your Bible told us that one day there would be what? A brood of vipers. And that they are coming to get us. They are coming to establish something in the world. And that's why God has called them what they are, that they are snakes and that they're low in the grass. And
That bell means Kevin is correct. Ding.
no, I thought I was
I was wondering where that came from.
I know. Every time we say ding.
I thought I was.
Gets a gold star.
Time's up. Time's up, and it is up, folks. Who wants? Actually, are you praying for us today, Alex?
No, but I do want to say that I've come up. So every time someone says correlation, right? Remdesivir, Venom, blood clots, Cobra crate, artists, Corey, or virus, take a drink or make your bingo card. You'll definitely get bingo.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right, Doc, go ahead and pray for us.
All right. Lord God, we just want to thank you, Lord, for bringing us together again for another podcast. We tried to do our best getting through this muck and mire. We try to make fun of it sometimes just to try, because the humor helps us
It's
cope.
heavy, yeah.
Yes, it's heavy stuff. And Lord, we just pray that you would just open the eyes of our listeners, and that they would be skeptical, that they would not trust all the voices out there, but only your voice, Lord. And you said that your sheep hear your voice. Let us all be your sheep and hear your voice, Lord, and follow your direction. We ask this in your name.
Amen. And
Amen.
Australia, China, we're praying for you guys. Just know we see what's happening, and we're sorry that's happening, but we're praying for you.
Yeah, so your hearts go out to you all around the world.
Thank you to our loyal subscribers and listeners. We really appreciate you guys. And we want to let you know about supernaturalJunkies.com. If you sign up for the newsletter there, you'll be the first to know about anything that's happening with us, any events we might be doing. And also, Kevin's book, The COVID Beast, is out now and available on Kindle. You can get that on our website. And the Audible version, as well as the softcover book, should be out in a few weeks from now. Signing up for that newsletter will get you in the loop to be the first to hear about it. We're also going to be coming out with supernaturalJunkies.com gear with that cute cartoon logo, because some of you have been asking about that. We're going to have it on mugs, t-shirts, and hoodies, as well as stickers and magnets. If you want in on that, like I said, sign up for that newsletter. Also, if you love our podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could write us a review on any of the platforms you listen on, or share this with anyone you think might be interested. I know we harp on it all the time, but that's because that review helps us get found. It helps boost us on the algorithm, and that's why we're always asking. So, because we don't have a lot of reviews right now, so that would mean the world to us. Once again, we appreciate you guys. So grateful for you. Thank you, and have a blessed week.